She didn't ask if it was true. She didn't ask for my side. She opened the front door, handed me a bag with 2 days' worth of clothes, and told me I needed to think about what I'd done. The problem was I hadn't done anything. My name is Daniel Mercer. I had lived in that house for 4 years. I had paid for that house for 3 of them. I had married Renee Calloway Mercer on Saturday afternoon in October in front of 63 people who told me she was the best thing that had ever walked into my life. They weren't wrong, or so I thought. Renee had a daughter from her first marriage. Her name was Piper. Piper was 22 years old, lived in the guest suite above the garage, and had never once held a job for longer than 6 weeks. I paid for her car. I paid for her phone plan. I paid for 2 semesters of a design program she dropped out of without telling either of us until the refund window had already closed. I'm not listing these things to build a case. I am listing them because they're what made what came next so difficult to process. We lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. The house was a 4-bedroom property in a gated community off Pinnacle Peak Road, the kind of neighborhood where the landscaping is maintained by a service and the HOA sends letters and envelopes that look like wedding invitations. Renee worked in pharmaceutical sales. She was excellent at it. She earned more than I did in some years and never let me forget it in the years that she did. That's not a complaint. That's context. The accusation came on a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen making coffee at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had a 7:30 video call with a client in Denver, and I was watching the clock. Renee came downstairs with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was only coming downstairs to deliver it. Piper told me what happened, she said. I turned around. What happened when? I said, last Friday night, she said, when you drove her home from Kirsten's. I had driven Piper home from a dinner at her friend's house in North Scottsdale. Renee had been at a 2-day sales conference in Tempe. Piper had texted saying she'd had too much to drink and needed a ride. I drove 23 minutes there and 23 minutes back. I dropped her at the garage entrance. She went upstairs. I went to bed. That is everything that happened. She said you made her uncomfortable, Renee said. She said you said things to her that were inappropriate. The word inappropriate landed like a stone dropped into standing water. The ripples were immediate. I set down my coffee mug. What things? I said. Renee looked at the counter. She said you made comments about her appearance. She said you told her she looked better than she did at our wedding. She said the way you said it made her feel unsafe. I stood there for a long moment. Not because I was searching for a response, but because I was trying to understand whether this conversation was actually happening. That is not what I said. I told her. I said she looked nice. She had a dress on I hadn't seen before. It was a 4-word sentence. I said it, and then I turned on the radio. Renee nodded slowly, the way people nod when they have already decided not to believe you. She's my daughter, Daniel. I can't just dismiss what she told me. I understood that. I genuinely understood that. What I did not understand was why understanding her position required me to be guilty of something I had not done. The bag was packed within the hour. 2 days of clothes, my laptop, my charger, my medication. She handed it to me at the front door. I think you need to go stay somewhere and really think about this, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. And if I think about it and come to the same conclusion I have right now, I said, which is that nothing happened. Then what? She didn't answer. She closed the door. I stayed at a Marriott off the 101 for the first 4 nights. Then I called my brother, Warren Mercer, who lived in a 2-bedroom condo in Tempe, and he told me to come. I slept on his couch with a pillow that smelled like fabric softener and stared at his ceiling until 2 or 3 in the morning for 12 consecutive nights. Warren is 4 years older than me. He has been divorced once. He said very little during those first 2 weeks, which is the most helpful thing he could have done. I contacted an attorney on day 4. Her name was Claire Ashworth, a family law attorney based in Phoenix with a reputation that several people I trusted had independently mentioned. I did not go to her office looking to file for divorce. I went because I needed to understand what my options were if this situation deteriorated further. She listened to the full account. She asked calm, specific questions. She took notes. At the end of the meeting, she looked at me and said, "The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And right now you have no corroboration either way." But I will say this, she added. The way this was handled by your spouse is something we should document. I asked what she meant. You were removed from your primary residence, she said, based on an uncorroborated accusation from an adult third party, with no investigation, no conversation, and no request for your account before the decision was made. That matters, she said, not because it makes you automatically right, but because it establishes a pattern of how conflict is resolved in this marriage. I sat with that for several days. I want to be honest about something. In those first 2 weeks, there were moments where I wondered if I had done something I wasn't seeing correctly. That is what false accusations do to people. Even when you know the truth, there's a voice that asks if your perception is distorted. I replayed that car ride more times than I can count. The exact words, the tone, the radio station, the turn signal, the garage door closing behind her. Every detail was the same every time, because it was a 23-minute drive home from dinner. It was nothing, and yet I was lying on my brother's couch at 2 a.m. inventorying it like it was evidence in a courtroom. That is what I want you to understand about this situation before we go any further. Not the logistics, the weight of it. The way an accusation doesn't need a conviction to do damage. The way the person who loves you can become the instrument of the most precise harm. On day 19, Renee texted me. The message said, I think we should talk. Have you had time to reflect? I read it 4 times. Have you had time to reflect? Not, I've been thinking about what you said. Not, I want to hear your side again. Have you had time to reflect? Which assumed, in its grammatical structure, that there was something for me to reflect on, that I had done something, that the question was not whether I was guilty, but whether I had come to terms with it. I showed the message to Warren. He read it and put the phone down on the kitchen table. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, What are you going to do? I said, I have an appointment with Claire tomorrow morning. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something directly, because this is the decision point, the place where the whole story turns. At this moment, I had a choice. I could respond to Renee's text with openness. I could go back, sit across from her, and try to talk through it again, try to reach her. Or I could do what I did. What would you have done? Drop in the comments, seriously. Because the people I've told this story to in real life are split almost exactly down the middle. And I think the reasons why are more interesting than the answer itself. The next morning, I met with Claire Ashworth for 90 minutes. I told her about the text. I told her about the 19 days. I told her about the pattern Claire herself had identified in our first meeting. The way conflict in the marriage had consistently ended with me adjusting, apologizing, or accommodating, not because I was always wrong, but because the alternative was a silence that could last for days. I told her about the car. I told her about Piper. I told her everything from the beginning, not because she hadn't heard it, but because I needed to hear myself say it out loud one more time to be certain. At the end of it, I said, I want a file. She nodded once. All right, she said. Let's do this properly. The filing took 10 days to prepare. Claire was meticulous. Arizona is a community property state, and we had 4 years of shared finances to untangle. The house was purchased before the marriage, but I had contributed substantially to the mortgage during our time together. There was documentation, bank records, transfer histories, tax filings, all of it organized and prepared before a single piece of paper was handed to Renee. I did not warn her. I did not text her back after the reflect message, not because I wanted to punish her with silence, but because I had nothing left to say that could be said in a text message, and because Claire had advised me, professionally, not to engage in any substantive communication about the marriage until the papers were served. Renee called me twice during those 10 days. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message said she hoped I was okay and that she thought we should sit down in person. The second message said she was starting to get worried and asked me to please call her back. The tone had shifted slightly, not an apology, but the certainty had cracked just slightly. I noticed. I did not call back. On a Thursday afternoon, the papers were served at the Pinnacle Peak Roadhouse. I was not present. That was intentional. The process server was professional and efficient. Renee received the envelope. Renee opened the envelope. And then, approximately 40 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered. She was crying, not dramatically, But the way people cry when something they didn't believe was real suddenly becomes real. You filed, she said. Yes, I said. Daniel, I thought we were just taking space. You didn't take space, Renee, I said. You removed me from my home and asked me if I had reflected on what I'd done. I hadn't done anything. A long silence. I was trying to protect her, she said. She's my daughter. I know, I said, and you had every right to believe her and protect her. But you didn't extend me the same consideration. Not once. She asked if we could meet. I said that all communications should go through Claire Ashworth from this point forward. She said, "You're serious." I said, "I was serious 3 weeks ago when I told you nothing happened. I was serious then. This is the same seriousness." I ended the call. My hands were steady. I noticed that and thought it was worth noting. What happened next, I did not anticipate. Not fully. Piper called me 40 minutes after Renee did. I don't know how she got clarity on the situation that quickly, but she did. She called from her cell phone, and I almost didn't answer. I answered. She was not crying. She was loud. "You are unbelievable," she said. "You are actually going to blow up our whole family over this." I said, "Piper, this call should not be happening. You are destroying my mother because of me," she said. That is insane." I said, "I am not destroying anything. I am responding to what happened." She said, "Nothing happened. You know, nothing happened." I paused. I want you to understand why I paused. Because that sentence, "You know, nothing happened," was in one breath the closest thing to an admission I had heard in 29 days. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not say, "I was wrong." She said, "You know, nothing happened," speaking to me, not denying the event, but acknowledging that both of us shared a knowledge that the accusation had been something other than the truth. "You're right," I said. "I do know that. And I knew it on the night you said it too." She went quiet. "This call needs to end," I said. "Please don't contact me directly again." I hung up. What followed over the next several weeks was not dramatic. That is the part people don't expect when they hear a story like this. They expect courtroom confrontations and explosive revelations. What actually happened was quieter and, in many ways, harder. Renee retained her own attorney, a man named Philip Grantham who worked out of a firm in Paradise Valley. The process was civil in the legal sense. Neither party was trying to destroy the other. The house was appraised. My contributions were calculated. A settlement figure was arrived at through documentation and negotiation, not argument. It took 4 months. Piper, as far as I know, was not asked to provide any formal account of anything. Her name appeared nowhere in the divorce proceedings. The divorce was filed on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, because that is what it was in the most precise sense of the phrase. Not hatred, not betrayal in the classical sense. Irreconcilable. Two people who could not agree on the most fundamental question in a marriage. When your partner tells you something is true, do you believe them? I have thought often about what Renee was feeling in those first hours. Not to excuse what she did, but to understand it. Her daughter came to her with something that frightened her. She is, at her core, a protective person. That quality was part of what I had loved about her. The same instinct that made her drive Piper to doctor appointments and sit outside audition rooms and cancel work trips to be home for things that mattered. That instinct was what closed the door on me. It did not make it right, but I understood it. What I could not accommodate was the absence of doubt. Not even a question, not even a pause. The immediate, total, architectural certainty that her daughter's discomfort was my fault. That was the part that told me something about the load-bearing structures of the marriage, something that the good years had kept hidden. I moved into an apartment in Arcadia, a neighborhood on the east side of Phoenix, in the 5th month after the papers were filed. The settlement was fair. Not generous, fair. I got what I had contributed. I got my accounts. I got my name back on a life that was entirely mine to manage. I am not going to tell you I felt triumphant. I am not going to tell you I felt destroyed. The honest answer is that I felt clarified, like something that had been slightly out of focus for several years had finally resolved into a shape I could see clearly. Warren came over with a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses on the night I moved in. He looked around at the empty apartment, the boxes, the bare walls, the window that faced a courtyard with 3 palm trees, and he said, "It looks like the beginning of something." I thought about that for a while. Yeah, I said. I think that's right. The last thing I'll tell you is this. About 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "This is Piper. I know I don't have the right to say this, but I'm sorry. I was in a bad place and I made it worse, and I'm sorry." I read it once. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because some things don't require a response to be real. She said what she needed to say. I heard it. That was enough. And somewhere in Scottsdale, in a house off Pinnacle Peak Road, Renee Calloway was learning, maybe, that the instinct to protect the people you love is only worth something if it doesn't require you to hollow out someone else to do it. Maybe she learned that. Maybe she didn't. It wasn't mine to manage anymore. Personal reflection. What this story reveals isn't simply the danger of a lie. It's the danger of certainty. Renee Calloway Mercer did not set out to destroy her marriage. She likely believed, in the hours after Piper came to her, that she was doing exactly what a good mother should do. She was protecting her child. She was taking a serious accusation seriously. In many contexts, that would be the right instinct. The failure was not in the instinct itself. It was in the complete absence of inquiry that followed. To believe someone you love is not the same as refusing to hear anyone else. Those are two different things, and the line between them matters enormously, especially in a marriage where the person on the other side of the accusation has also, presumably, earned some measure of trust. Daniel's response is equally worth examining. Some people will read this and see a man who was cold, calculated, and withholding. They will argue that a person who truly wanted to save his marriage would have responded to Renee's text, would have shown up, would have tried harder. That is a fair reading. But there is another reading, which is that Daniel had already tried, in the most important moment, and had been dismissed without hesitation. The text asking whether he had reflected was not an invitation to reconnect. It was a continuation of the same verdict. And some people, when they have been told the verdict is final, choose to stop appealing and start moving. Piper is the most psychologically complicated figure here. What she did was serious. But the line between "I felt uncomfortable" and "I was harmed" is not always clear to a 22-year-old who has grown up in an environment where discomfort was treated as danger. That is not an excuse. It is a context. The text she sent at the end suggests she understood the weight of what she had set in motion. Whether she fully understood the mechanism, how a small distortion, believed completely, could dismantle something large, is less certain. What stays with me about this story is the quiet devastation of it. No single villain, no single moment of malice, just a series of choices, each one made by someone who believed they were doing what the situation required, and none of them stopping long enough to ask whether the situation itself had been built on something solid.